What is up, guys? I'm KBHD here. So, in case you somehow missed it, Apple's WWDC was this week, and the stuff they announced there has been making tech headlines pretty much every day since. So typically when Apple gets up on stage, they share something that they've been, working on behind the scenes for a long time, and they're finally able to share it with the world. They get on stage and they share it, and then there's this sort of reaction from the internet. Everyone's blogging, tweeting, making their videos about it, and then Apple's usually just like zipped, nothing. They never really reply. That's typically where the conversation ends. But not this year. 2020 in many ways is a little different. So after the keynote this year, after their online-only presentation, I got to have a conversation with the man you may recognize from tons of FaceTime in the keynote, Senior VP at Apple, Craig Federighi. We had a decently long chat on the Waveform podcast with a whole range of topics, from the behind the scenes of how they made that 2-hour keynote movie, basically, to all the software and the new stuff that they've announced. And, it's not all roses and flowers. Some of the stuff they announced was pretty controversial too. So luckily enough, I was recording video on my end. Craig had some iPhones set up recording his end in Apple Park. So if you want more of the summary of the really long list of things that they've announced that are new, you can go back and watch my last 2 videos that go into that stuff in lots of detail. But this is the more rare conversation part. All right, so point number 1, default apps. So you may remember one of the new announcements in iOS 14 was the ability to newly change your default mail or browser apps. And the reaction to that was at first largely very positive, including from me. That's from a very traditionally stubborn company from like Apple, not something you would expect. But then after like a day or 2 of digestion, the questions start coming up, well, what about maps? Why not other things too? Here's what he had to say.
I did hear that you were looking forward to using alternatives. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
there you go. It's something for everybody.
I love that extra layer. I think my natural question to that is, okay, it's only mail and browser. Is there a reason you didn't have full-on, chaos or even just maps? Because I think maps would have been nice to also be able to set as a default.
Honestly, but great point. I mean, I think for us, we looked at what were the top things that we'd been hearing people say they wanted to configure, and there's definitely those 2 that rose to the top. So I'll certainly take the input about maps as well. It was. This was just where we started. I think your point on chaos is an important one. I mean, obviously with iOS, we're very careful about trying to keep, we know how platforms can sort of descend into chaos, and particularly when apps that might honestly not even be browsers, decide they're going to be a browser, and then try to hook into being your browser because maybe they could redirect you to a different tracked ad experience when you click on something, or bounce you into who knows what. And so we are very careful about making sure that experience, that we don't have people getting misled or have their device gets configured into a place where they just don't even like using their phone anymore because it's gotten so wonked up. So we proceed cautiously on these things for sure.
Does that mean there will be I assume, maybe I shouldn't assume, that not every app can add that flag to potentially be a default browser, but only certain approved ones?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So we will have criteria for you have to be a general purpose browser, and there'll be, the ones you would think of as using as your browser will of course all qualify. But we don't want a random game to just claim like, yeah, I'm a browser. I'm willing to throw up a WebKit view now and then in the middle of my game experience. I'm going to be your browser, because we think that could readily be abused. So we want real general purpose mail apps and real general purpose browsers to be able to present themselves to the user with this functionality and keep out all the rest of the confusion.
Gotcha. So the browser point, I think, is actually a really good one. Something to sort of think about a little bit. If any app can just become your browser when any link comes up, and then that app has different policies on tracking and privacy, then it sort of goes against your own policies on tracking and privacy. Now, we see this on Android all the time, and it's actually more of it feels like a convenience and more customization feature. But in Relay for Reddit, for example, if I click a link to read a story, it doesn't have to open Chrome. There's a browser built into the app here, so it just opens that. And that's convenient. But Craig's response here is basically that sometimes Apple has to take a stance against some of that convenience in favor of maintaining their own pretty strict privacy policy. Makes sense. Then next up was Siri. So Siri got a bunch of improvements in iOS 14 as well, answers a bunch of new questions now, and it also is in this compact new UI with a much smaller animation. I pointed out in my videos, and a lot of people also reacted, that you couldn't really interact with things behind Siri despite that smaller animation. Siri also gets a new compact UI, both on the phone and on the iPad. But something we've noticed since using it is a compact UI, but you can't interact with things underneath or behind it. Is that intentional? Is that a limitation? Very. What's that story?
No, and in fact, we tried it both ways. We had internally we had prototypes running where you would scroll behind the Siri answers as you brought them up, and initially we thought that was going to be really great, and so we implemented it that way. And then what we found was that for most of the interactions we were having with Siri, that then created this kind of extra heaviness to it, because if you just wanted to check the weather or look up a piece of information, and then you were ready to move on, your scroll gesture wasn't going to move on. The Siri result was going to stick around there. So you always had this additional step of dismissing the result, and we found that to be extra heavy. And so, we'll continue to listen to what people have to say through the beta period, because, like I say, we actually have it working both ways. But our feeling was that we wanted to achieve a great lightness, not just visually, but in terms of you could dip into Siri, get an answer, and move on quickly without any kind of overhead in the subsequent interaction. So there's definitely a real balance there.
Yeah, I felt that the experience was a little different on the phone versus the tablet. On the phone, it felt like it made sense. I'm not necessarily reading or scrolling or doing things behind Siri very often, but the tablet with the bigger screen, to me, felt like an opportunity to give me a little more of like the multitasking feel that I talk about on iPad.
Yeah.
Where you do feel like you have a little more control over leaving Siri there while you do other things and coming back to it. So that might be something to look into.
Yeah. Did you ever thought about how you would have expected if you were to, let's say, start, you got your answer and then you started scrolling and doing other things on your iPad.
Yeah.
At what point you would expect Siri to kind of get itself out of the way, or whether you would have preferred to, have it hang out for, minutes and then you go over there and manually put it away?
Yeah. So I think because that animation came in from the bottom and then the answer came in from the top, I almost felt like it would be different behavior on the phone, but I almost felt like just being able to swipe it out of the top where it came from to dismiss it, sort of like a notification, even though it isn't one, or bringing that Siri animation from the bottom corner and just swiping it down out of where it appeared.
Yep.
So that's, again, there's probably 1,000 ways to also consider doing it, but I think that just because I'm such an iPad multitasking advocate, I think that would be something I'd be interested in.
All right.
So there you go. Makes sense to me. The one extra step of dismissing Siri is one extra step they feel like they wanted to avoid. But also, again, I think it's important to mention that these are, the videos I was making were about developer betas, and these are early software that can continue to be changed down the road. He mentions they could change it, so if you do see that behavior change, maybe they've thought about it more. All right, so then the big one, macOS Big Sur. New visuals, new rounded corners, new icons. I had to talk about it. Seeing all those visual changes, it got a very mixed reaction online, and I'll share some of mine after, but there's a sort of an overarching theme of these rounded corners and a new transparency and a different sort of look to it. Can you talk about that theme of macOS Big Sur?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, just to address the 11.0, we do feel that between the new design and the beginning of a new chapter with the introduction of Apple Silicon, I think this is just the beginning. This is a real renewal of the platform in many ways, and so we're really excited to mark this with the next chapter, the turning to the next chapter with 11. As far as the design goes, I think it's a huge part of our visual scenery of our lives at this point. And so what seems right is partly what we're used to seeing on that screen every day. And when it changes, immediately there's all kinds of little pattern recognizers in our brain that go like, hold on, something's different. I feel like after you use the UI and I've been living on it for months, it feels natural. It feels fresh and yet clearly, distinctly Mac. And I love it. And I think that it's natural the first time you see it. And of course, the internet reacts on like they see a single screenshot and then let's start a tweet storm and then let's pile on. They don't necessarily live on it, right? And so I will love to hear the feedback of people as they've really made it their system, like they have the previous Mac UIs for weeks, and come back and say, how do you feel about it now? I think the design team did amazing work, and I find things like rounding. Some of those choices may seem arbitrary, but in fact, it's extremely consistent throughout that whole experience, and I think it's really organic. Straight edges like this are like the process of human manufacturing processes. If you look out in nature, if you look at our own faces, there's a lot of curves, right? Natural curves. And so I think there's something really beautiful and organic about the look of the UI. And I think the use of the materials is really great. The clarity of some of the unified toolbars, I think, is just clean and fresh and really deferential to content. And then, of course, it's a big step to change the icons of the Mac. That's certainly a signature change. But what we found when we live on it is we're all moving back and forth between our iPhone, our iPad, our Mac, and having that consistency and familiarity just takes a level of sort of mental mapping energy out of the whole thing. And it's relaxing, it's comfortable, it's clear. And so, we approached that decision with a lot of debate. But in the end, we tried it and it just felt right. And I think as people use it, they're going to come to the same conclusion.
Yeah, those new icons are not from iPad or iPhone, right? They're new. They're a totally new icon set as far as like Finder and Spotify and Final Cut, like all these new apps on the Mac.
We did not create a Spotify icon.
True.
We would not make that step. It might be fun to try, but I don't think we're allowed to do that.
Right.
We did. You're right. So there's some Mac, some icons like Finder exactly where there's no analog, and so we got to imagine with the new shape and aesthetic how should the Mac look, and I think I love what we came up with there. Then there are other icons like say Safari or Messages where we took the iOS icon and the typical, chiclet shape, but applied a little bit of the traditional Mac craft to it. And I think that's been where there's some of the controversy right now, where people are saying, hold on, I know what that iPhone icon looks like, and this one seems just a little different. Something's tripping here and going like, this isn't quite right. And that's natural and understandable, but we did want to pay homage to that history of great craft and detailing that's been part of the history of Mac icons, and so we kind of brought those two together, and hopefully in the end successfully.
I think this is all a very eloquent way of saying you'll get used to it, and I think that's kind of, he's got a good point. You probably will eventually get used to it after a while, but the other thing is design is subjective. And sometimes there are designs that even if you do get used to them, you still don't like them. Like for me, an example is on my phone, I use Waze for navigation. I don't use Apple Maps or Google Maps that much anymore. And that's because I like the feature set. But every time I open Waze, I hate looking at it. It's ugly. It doesn't look good. It's not clean or elegant or flat or minimal or modern or anything. Every time I open it, I hate it. But I don't switch because it still has the feature set I like. And I feel like Apple knows that. And they also know people aren't going to switch off from Mac OS because they didn't really like the new icons. People complain about iPhones all the time. And then what do they go out and buy? The next iPhone. So he's got a point. We'll get used to it. But also, Craig, or anyone else at Apple who may stumble upon this video, I talked about the other icons and how I might not like them, and that's preference. But this battery icon in system preferences, you gotta fix this one. I'm sorry. There's no way this should make it out of the beta. Please change this battery icon. All right, I got a couple fan questions as well. I asked.
Okay.
I put it out on YouTube. We had some questions, and we're gonna have Craig on the podcast. First one: the iPad still does not have a default weather and calculator app, and they want to know why.
There's some things that we We have not done because to do it, we would want to do something really distinctly great in that space. And I think it's obviously easy to create a calculator app, but creating one that feels like, wow, this is the greatest iPad calculator app, that it felt like. I think we want to do it when we can do it really, really well. And we honestly have just haven't gotten around to doing it great. So that day may come, but and you know, weather, it'd be easy enough to scale up our existing weather app, but we feel like, what would a great weather app for iPad be? Like, let's do that before we do it. And otherwise, they're great options on the App Store. I mean, there are thousands of options on the App Store, in fact. So
very true. I think this one resonates to me because one of my favorite apps, you guys just acquired Dark Sky, so it's no longer on Android. So I'm like, this iOS weather app better turn into this amazing thing. So I think it may be time for an iPad weather app. That's just me. I'm just saying.
All right. Well, and it could be time for you to go iPhone exclusive. I think
hey,
that would be another good move.
That's a big point of leverage. You make a great point. Another question is there's a very small group of people out there apparently that have an iPad and want to use an Apple Watch but don't have an iPhone. Is this a workflow you guys think about, or are there groups of people who maybe that's too small of a group of people to cater to, but will there ever be an iPad Apple Watch experience?
We don't. I mean, I get it. I think there's an interesting place where Apple Watch can, for many people, take that kind of the device that I need to have with it having LTE. It can be that device that gives you the degree of connectedness on the go, and then you've got your iPad when you want to get deeper. And it's a sensible point. It is not one that we have pursued yet. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out, but. So I get it. I love using my iPad and I love using my Apple Watch, so I could understand that.
So there you have it. Some interesting stuff, some new information, and some clarifications on stuff that's already been announced. Good conversation material. And again, it's a much longer, fuller, more detailed conversation over on the Waveform podcast. So in case you want more quarantine content, or if you haven't listened to my podcast yet, feel free to hit the link below the like button to check it out. We've got other guests on previous episodes too, but you can subscribe and listen to it anywhere podcasts are. But let me know what you think in the comments section below, and we can continue the conversation, 2020 style. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Shout out to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. So if you're like me and you feel like you've watched nearly everything online, the number one thing you need is ExpressVPN. See, streaming services like Netflix have different shows and movies available in different countries, which means there are titles out there that you didn't even know that you don't have access to. But ExpressVPN lets you change your location, which essentially unlocks all these different shows and titles that Netflix and other streaming services have. So I've been using ExpressVPN to watch Star Trek Discovery, which is only available for Netflix in the UK. But it's pretty easy. You just fire up the ExpressVPN app, change the location to the UK, and then refresh Netflix or whatever service you're using, and that's it. It's fast. It works on a computer or on my phone or even on the TV, so you can watch these new things on the big screen. Look, you've heard me talk about VPNs before and why they're so important for online security and privacy, but ExpressVPN is the one I trust because they explicitly do not track any of your online activity. And they've even gone above and beyond to engineer every single one of their VPN servers to run only in RAM, which means even if there was a bit of data tracked, which there isn't, it would be gone with a reboot. So thanks to them being such a good partner with the channel, I'm giving away 3 extra months of ExpressVPN for free. So if you want to take advantage of this content boosting VPN, feel free to head over to expressvpn.com/mkbhd. So that's been it. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.